This is certifiably insane. The thought wasn't a frantic drumbeat, it was a screech of tires in my mind, a constant, looping warning signal that I was driving headlong into a catastrophe. It had been playing for the better part of an hour, ever since my older sister, Maya, had trapped me in my own apartment with a proposal so audacious, so profoundly unhinged, that my first reaction had been laughter. She hadn't been joking. And now, the laughter had curdled into a knot of dread in my stomach. I was standing in the middle of a private, art gallery Stark studio that smelled of ozone, expensive florals, and my own rapidly dissolving sanity. "Hold still, Leo," Maya said. Her voice was a maddening cocktail of pity and pure, uncut glee. "Silas needs to see the canvas he's working with." I was positioned before a merciless triptych of mirrors under lights so bright they felt like a physical weight. I felt flayed open, exposed. I'd always been on the lanky side. At 22, I still had the coltish build of a young man who hadn't quite settled into his own frame. My hair was my one concession to vanity, a curtain of dark silk that fell just past my shoulders. I'd grown it out during college and discovered I liked the way it felt, the way it caught the light. On good days, it had a natural wave that, according to Maya, women spent fortunes to emulate. My face was fine. Clear skin, a straight nose, and eyes that my sister always called too poetic for a boy. My jaw lacked the chiseled authority I saw in magazines, and my lips were fuller than most men's. These were features I'd never interrogated, just accepted. Now they were being scrutinized like blueprints for some bizarre, high-stakes demolition project. The architect of this madness, my sister, stood beside me, practically vibrating. Maya was 3 years my senior, and where I was a quiet pond, she was a tidal wave. Fiercely loyal, impossibly stubborn, and currently hell-bent on revenge. The target of this revenge was her ex-boyfriend, Grant Covington. The name alone was a 2-syllable insult. He was everything you'd expect from a man who'd coasted on a Golden Voice scholarship and a killer smile, managing to carry that unearned confidence into the corporate world. He was handsome, charming, and possessed an insidious ability to make his arrogance seem like effortless charisma. He had dated Maya for nearly a year in which he'd convinced her she was the sun in a sky, only to unceremoniously dump her for an Instagram model from his company's marketing team. The breakup had been a public execution. Maya's heart hadn't just been broken, it had been filleted. Her plan, concocted in a fugue state of grief and fury, was simple in its premise and terrifying in its execution. Grant was co-hosting a massive Valentine's Day charity gala. It was the social event of the season for his circle, and he would, of course, be there with his new, dazzling girlfriend. Maya's plan wasn't just to make him jealous. It was to prove a point. She wanted to prove that Grant was so terminally shallow, so predictable, that he would fall for any beautiful new face, even if that face belonged to her little brother. "I'm telling you, it's flawless," she had insisted, pacing my tiny living room like a caged panther. "He's never met you properly. He's seen maybe one old photo from my graduation, but that's it. You have the build, the hair, the face. We just need to refine the details." "Refine the details? Maya, you want me to go and drag and catfish your ex-boyfriend? This isn't refinement. This is psychological warfare." "He deserves it," she'd shot back, her eyes flashing with a pain that silenced my protests. "He told me I was getting too comfortable. He said he needed someone with more dazzle. Well, I'm going to give him so much dazzle he'll be seeing stars." And so my loyalty, my one true weakness, had dragged me here. A man with a perfectly sculpted silver bob and the sharp, assessing eyes of a master craftsman approached us. This was Silas, the miracle worker Maya had on retainer. He was less a makeup artist and more a sculptor who used flesh as his medium. He circled me once, slowly, a low, thoughtful hum emanating from his chest. "The canvas is promising," Silas murmured, more to himself than to us. He gently cupped my chin, turning my head from side to side. His touch was clinical, impersonal. Good bone structure, but soft enough. High cheekbones and those lips, divine. But the brows are a betrayal. And the skin. He paused, leaning closer. The skin tells the story of a man. We have a great deal of work to do. He released me. Maya, my love, did you bring the necessary items? Maya beamed, hefting a large, ominous-looking duffel bag onto a sterile chrome chair. Everything you asked for and more. For the next hour, I was not given a makeover. I was deconstructed. A quiet assistant cleansed, exfoliated, and steamed my face until it was tingling and raw. My betrayal of a brow was tamed with hot wax and ruthless tweezers, each pluck a sharp sting that made my eyes water. Silas supervised it all with the quiet intensity of a surgeon. Then came the moment of truth. Silas shooed Maya out of the main studio and led me to a private dressing alcove. He laid out a series of garments on a velvet chaise that looked more like medieval instruments than clothing. This, he said, holding up a formidable, boned garment, is your new foundation. It will give you a waist. It will not be comfortable. True art rarely is. He then presented a set of silicone forms, shockingly realistic to the touch, a pair of delicate lace panties, and a garter belt with silk stockings. I just stared, my mouth completely dry. I don't know if I can do this, Maya, I whispered through the door. Her voice came back, firm but laced with a vulnerability she rarely showed. Yes, you can, Leo. Think about what he did. Think about how small he made me feel. Just for one night. Please. I took a deep breath, the scent of lavender and regret filling my lungs, and let Silas begin the construction. The waist shaper was brutally tight, forcing an unnatural arch in my back and restricting my breaths to shallow sips. The breast forms were affixed with a cool, tacky adhesive, their weight a profound and alien pressure against my sternum. The lace of the panties and the whisper-soft silk of the stockings felt shockingly intimate against skin, still tender from the waxing. Finally, Silas brought in the dress. It was a slip dress of liquid crimson silk, a color that felt both classic and dangerous. As I slid it over my head, the fabric was cool and impossibly light against my skin. It settled over the engineered curves of my new body, clinging and flowing, creating a lie that was as breathtaking as it was terrifying. Silas led me back out to the triptych mirror. Maya was waiting, and when she saw me, her hands flew to her mouth, a small, choked sound escaping her lips. I turned to face my own reflection, and my breath hitched. The person staring back at me wasn't Leo. It was a stranger, a young woman with a delicate, flushed face, wide, nervous eyes, and a cascade of dark hair framing her features. Her body, squeezed and shaped by the hidden architecture beneath the red dress, had an hourglass curve that was entirely foreign, the slender column of her neck, the soft slope of her shoulders, the impossible, sweeping line from her ribs to her hips. It was a work of artifice and desperation. Leo, Maya whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Oh my God. The sculpture is blocked out, Silas declared, rubbing his hands together with a spark of artistic fervor in his eyes. Now, we paint the masterpiece. As Silas began the long, meticulous process of applying makeup, Maya filled me in on the final details of the plan. She perched on a stool beside me, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. Your name is Lila, she said. Lila Vance. No relation to Grant, just an unfortunate coincidence. You're a friend of mine. You just moved to the city from the West Coast. You're a freelance illustrator. It explains the artistic vibe. You're shy, a little mysterious. Don't talk too much, let him do the talking. Men like Grant are in love with the sound of their own voices. What if he asks about you? I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. Silas was concentrating on my eyes with a brush that felt like a butterfly's wing, and I was afraid to move. He won't. I'll be on the other side of the ballroom with friends. We'll make a point of ignoring him. You're my ghost, my secret weapon. He'll be drawn to you because you're new, you're beautiful, and you have absolutely no connection to me. The plan was diabolical. And as Silas worked his magic, it began to feel terrifyingly real. I sat in that chair for what felt like an eternity, a willing statue for a master sculptor. Silas narrated his process in a soothing hum, a litany of artistic choices that were fundamentally changing the face I knew. Foundation first, he explained, applying a cool liquid with a soft sponge, blending it seamlessly down my neck. We don't cover the canvas, we perfect it. We erase the story the world has written on it and prepare to write a new one. Then came the contouring, a subtle art of deception. With deft strokes of darker powders and shimmering highlighters, he sculpted my face. He softened the angle of my jaw, carved out the hollows of my cheeks, and slimmed the bridge of my nose. With every brushstroke, the face in the mirror became less and more mine. The masculine planes receded and feminine curves were conjured from light and shadow. But the eyes were where his artistry ascended to something akin to sorcery. The eyes must be the soul of the creation, he whispered, as if sharing a sacred secret. They are your best feature. We will make them undeniable. He applied a palette of warm, smoky eyeshadows, creating depth and allure. The delicate, steady trace of a liquid eyeliner pen tickled my lash line, ending in a perfect, subtle wing that made my eyes look tilted upwards, more almond-shaped. He had me look down as he applied 2 coats of mascara, then, with the precision of a watchmaker, a set of wispy, natural-looking false eyelashes. When he told me to open my eyes, I gasped. The eyes staring back at me were enormous, dark, and framed by a fan of impossibly long lashes. They looked soulful and mysterious. They looked like her eyes. Lila's eyes. The final transformative touch was the lipstick. Silas had chosen a vibrant, blue-toned red in a rich matte finish. You have a perfect Cupid's bow, he commented matter-of-factly. A red lip is not a request for attention, it is a statement of arrival. He outlined my lips with a pencil, perfecting their shape, then filled them in with the velvety color. The sensation was waxy and smooth, the scent faintly of vanilla. When he was done, the entire look snapped into focus. The bold lips balanced the dramatic eyes and gave the face a focal point of undeniable femininity and power. He handed me a small, silver hand mirror. Voila! I lifted it slowly. The face I saw was flawless. It was a beautiful girl's face. A wave of vertigo, sharp and dizzying, washed over me. Now, the final pieces of the performance, Maya said, her grin returning. From the duffel bag, she pulled a pair of strappy black stiletto heels. They were at least 4 inches high. You have got to be kidding me, I breathed. Getting them on was an ordeal. Standing was a challenge. Walking was a revelation. They forced a fundamental shift in my center of gravity, shortening my stride and compelling a liquid movement in my hips I'd never before experienced. It felt unnatural, precarious, and yet there was an undeniable elegance to it. My posture was suddenly perfect. My legs looked longer. The simple act of moving across the studio became a performance. Maya clapped her hands together. It's perfect. You're perfect. Grant is going to lose his mind. I looked at the girl in the mirror one last time, the soft hair, the painted face, the red dress clinging to a body that was and wasn't mine. I felt a strange, thrilling flutter in my stomach, followed immediately by a tidal wave of panic. I really don't know what I'm doing, I murmured, my voice sounding thin and unfamiliar. Just then, a crisp chime echoed as the studio door opened. A man stepped inside, shrugging a tailored coat from his broad shoulders, shaking off the February chill. He had an easy smile that could disarm armies and hair that looked artfully windswept. It was Grant. He was supposed to be meeting Maya's friend here, who would then drive them to the gala. My ride. His eyes scanned the studio, and for a terrifying second, they passed right over me, dismissing me as just another client. Then he did a double take. His gaze landed on me on the girl in the red dress. It snagged. It caught. It froze. His easy smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned, slack-jawed appraisal. His eyes traveled from the floor, up the line of my legs in their silk stockings and heels, over the impossible curve of my hips to my face. And then, the appraisal slowly, surely, melted into something else. Pure, undiluted interest. A slow, appreciative grin spread across his face, erasing his momentary confusion. My heart hammered against the confines of the corset, a frantic prisoner. From behind him, Maya gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. This was it. The trap was set. And as Grant took a step towards me, his eyes locked on mine with a hunter's focus, I knew there was no turning back from this beautiful, dangerous, terrifying game. The ballroom of the St. Regis was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and the heady perfume of 1,000 conversations. A string quartet played Vivaldi in a far corner, but their delicate music was a mere undercurrent to the boisterous symphony of laughter and clinking glasses. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like ghosts through the throng, their silver trays laden with champagne flutes and intricate hors d'oeuvres. It was overwhelmingly opulent, and I felt like an extra who had wandered onto the set of a prestige drama. Grant's hand was a warm, firm presence on the small of my back. It was intended as a gentlemanly gesture, a way to guide me through the crush, but it felt like a brand. Every point of contact was a high-voltage wire, sending jolts of panic and a strange, illicit thrill through the thin crimson silk of the dress. I could feel the heat of his palm through the fabric as if it were my own skin. "Impressive, isn't it?" Grant said, his voice a low rumble close to my ear. He had to lean in to be heard over the din, and I could smell the clean, spicy scent of his cologne. It was a good smell. I hated that it was a good smell. I just nodded, attempting a look of shy wonder, which wasn't difficult to feign. I was genuinely overwhelmed. My mind was a frantic race, a checklist of Maya's instructions on a loop. Name is Lila. Illustrator. New in town. Don't talk too much. Keep your voice light. Don't trip. The last one was currently my primary directive. The 4-inch heels were a constant betrayal, and the plush, unforgiving carpet of the ballroom was a minefield. "Can I get you a drink?" "Champagne?" Grant asked, his eyes crinkling in a smile that was probably a registered weapon in several states. "Yes, please," I managed to say. I pitched my voice higher, aiming for breathy and soft. It came out as a squeak. I cleared my throat, mortified, and tried again, forcing a small, hopefully demure smile. "That would be lovely." As he navigated toward the bar, I had a moment to breathe. I let my eyes scan the crowd and spotted Maya across the room. She was encircled by a group of her friends, laughing loudly and pointedly, not looking in my direction. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. It was the only thing keeping me from bolting. Grant returned with 2 flutes of champagne. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing against mine. The casual touch felt like an electric shock. "To a beautiful evening," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "And to beautiful new acquaintances." His gaze was intense, unwavering. It was the kind of look that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I understood now how Maya had fallen for it. It was potent. "Thank you," I murmured, taking a small sip. The bubbles tickled my nose. "So, Lila," he began, leaning against a marble column in a pose that was artfully casual. "Maya's friend mentioned you're an illustrator. That must be a fascinating field." "It has its moments," I said, keeping my answer vague. I remembered Maya's advice: let him talk. And he did. He talked about his work in finance, making it sound far more daring and heroic than it probably was. He talked about the gala, the months of planning, the importance of networking. I just listened, nodding at what seemed like the right moments, my eyes wide and attentive. I was playing a part, and, to my astonishment, he was buying every second of it. He didn't see a nervous guy in a dress. He saw a mysterious, beautiful woman who was captivated by him. His ego was doing most of the work for me. As he spoke, he punctuated his sentences with small, possessive gestures, a light touch on my arm to emphasize a point, his hand returning to the small of my back, his thumb drawing a slow, lazy circle on the silk. Each touch was a test, a subtle push of the boundaries. With each touch he wasn't rebuffed from, he grew more confident. "You know," he said, interrupting his own monologue, "I have to be honest, Lila. When I first saw you back at the studio, I was completely floored." My heart did a little stutter step. "Oh, absolutely," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "It's not just the dress, which is stunning, by the way. It's your eyes. They're incredible. It's like you're holding 1,000 secrets in them." It was a line. A cheesy, well-rehearsed, grade-A line. I knew it was a line. But hearing it directed at me, at this carefully constructed illusion of a woman, made a blush rise in my cheeks that wasn't feigned. My reaction, the blush, the way I dropped my gaze to my champagne glass, was genuine. And that scared me more than anything. The string quartet transitioned from Vivaldi to a slow, romantic ballad. Several couples began to drift toward the center of the floor. Grant's smile widened. He set his empty glass down on a passing waiter's tray. "I think they're playing our song," he said, holding out his hand. "May I have this dance?" My mind screamed. No, abort mission. Dancing meant proximity. It meant being held. It meant 1,000 opportunities to make a mistake, a clumsy step, a gesture that was too masculine, my voice dropping an octave. But Lila wouldn't say no. Lila, the shy, mysterious beauty, would blush and place her hand in his. So I did. His hand enveloped mine, warm and strong. He led me to the dance floor, his other hand settling firmly on my back again, this time lower, resting just above the curve of my hip that the corset had created. He pulled me closer than I was prepared for. The full length of my body was just inches from his. I could feel the warmth radiating from his chest, and I was painfully aware of the artificial softness of the silicone forms pressed against the hard planes of his suit. "Just relax," he murmured, his breath warm against my temple. "Follow my lead." We began to sway to the music. I was stiff at first, my entire body rigid with tension. My focus was entirely on my feet, trying to coordinate the unfamiliar movement in heels without face-planting in front of half the city's social elite. But Grant was a good dancer. He was confident, leading with subtle pressure and a steady rhythm. Slowly, tentatively, I started to relax into it. I stopped thinking about my feet and started responding to his lead. My body, constrained by the corset and balanced on the heels, moved in a way that was surprisingly fluid. The sway of my hips, a motion dictated by the shoes, felt almost natural in the context of the dance. He pulled me a little closer, and my head ended up resting against his shoulder, my cheek against the fine wool of his suit jacket. From this vantage point, all I could see was the dance floor swirling around us, a blur of color and light. The world narrowed to this small space, just the two of us moving together. The music, the low lights, the heat of his body, it was intoxicating. "You dance beautifully," he whispered, his voice a vibration against my ear. "It's like you were made to be held." Another line. But my traitorous heart fluttered anyway. I was lost. I wasn't Leo anymore, the awkward guy playing a part. In that moment, swaying to the music in the circle of his arms, I was Lila. And Lila was completely, utterly mesmerized. I was so deep in character, so lost in the dangerous fantasy of the moment, that I was beginning to forget where the performance ended and I began. The days following the gala were a strange, silent purgatory. I half expected my phone to remain dead, for Grant to have second thoughts, and chalk the entire night up to a bizarre lapse in judgment he'd rather forget. I wouldn't have blamed him. I spent most of my time in a state of anxious suspension, replaying the events of that night in a torturous loop. The feel of the silk dress, the pressure of the corset, the weight on my chest. The shock of his kiss, and the even greater shock of his reaction to the truth. I had stripped off the persona of Lila the moment I got home, scrubbing my face raw until every last trace of makeup was gone. I'd bundled the dress, the heels, and all the underlying architecture into the duffel bag and shoved it into the back of my closet, as if hiding the evidence could silence the turmoil it had stirred within me. But it wasn't that simple. Lila was gone, but she had left an echo. I'd catch myself looking in the mirror, trying to see what he had seen. I'd feel a phantom sensation of lace against my skin, or the memory of the corset's embrace. The experience had unlocked something in me, a door to a room I never knew existed, and I was terrified to either enter it or slam it shut for good. Then, on Thursday, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Grant. I know things are probably weird, but I meant what I said. I'd still like to see you again. As you. No dress required, unless you want to wear one." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the last sentence that did it, the casual, non-judgmental acceptance of it all. It wasn't a joke. It was an invitation. I took a shaky breath and, after a long moment, typed back a single word. "Okay." Our first date as Leo and Grant was as awkward as you'd expect. We met for coffee at a neutral, quiet cafe, far from any of our usual haunts. I wore jeans and a simple sweater, my long hair tied back in a messy knot. I felt plain, exposed, and incredibly nervous. He was just as handsome in the daylight, dressed in casual clothes, but he seemed just as uncertain as I was. We made small talk, dancing around the events of the gala, talking about everything but the elephant in the room. Finally, Grant sighed and put his coffee cup down. "Okay, can we just talk about it?" I nodded, grateful. "Please." "I'm not going to pretend I'm not confused," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The whole night I was attracted to a person. I thought that person was a woman named Lila. It turns out that person is a man named Leo. The attraction, it's still there. That's the part that's messing with my head." "It's messing with mine, too," I admitted, my voice low. "I've never done anything like that before. I've never even thought about it. It was just supposed to be a prank for Maya." "But was it?" he asked gently, his eyes searching mine. "When you were in that dress, when we were dancing, did you hate it?" I thought for a long, honest moment. I thought about the thrill of the transformation, the strange power I felt walking into that ballroom, the dizzying sensation of being found beautiful. "No," I whispered. "I didn't hate it. That's the part that scares me." A slow smile spread across Grant's face. It was the same appreciative smile from the studio, but this time it was just for me, for Leo. "It doesn't have to be scary." That coffee was a turning point. It was the beginning of us figuring out whatever us was going to be. He was patient, kind, and surprisingly supportive. He seemed to find my confusion endearing. He never pushed, never judged. He was simply there. A couple of weeks later, he came over to my apartment with a surprising proposition. "Let's go shopping," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Shopping for what?" "Whatever you want," he said with a shrug. I was just thinking, that night, the clothes were part of a costume. For a prank. For me. I wondered what it would be like if you picked something out just for you. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. We went to a vintage clothing store downtown, a quirky place filled with treasures from different eras. At first, I just browsed the men's section, but my eyes kept drifting across the aisle to the racks of colorful dresses and soft cashmere in the women's section. Grant noticed. "See something you like?" he asked, his tone completely casual. I pointed to a simple, forest green velvet dress. A slip dress, not unlike the red one, but with a softer, more understated elegance. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "You should try it on." My heart leaped into my throat. In the cramped, dusty changing room, my hands trembled as I slipped the velvet dress over my head. The fabric was heavy and plush, and it fell over my frame in a way that was surprisingly flattering, even without all of Lila's foundational architecture. I looked in the mirror and saw a softer version of the illusion. A boy in a beautiful dress. Not a woman, not a costume. Just me. I took a deep breath and stepped out. Grant was waiting. When he saw me, he didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked. And his eyes were filled with a warmth and tenderness that made my breath catch. "Leo," he said, his voice soft. "You look amazing." That day, he bought me the dress. And it wasn't for a prank or a performance. It was for me. Our relationship slowly deepened, moving from tentative exploration to genuine intimacy. One evening we were at his apartment, the green velvet dress lying across a chair. I had worn it for him, just around the house. We were sitting on the couch, talking, and the atmosphere was charged with a gentle, loving energy. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I turned my back to him, fumbling with the zipper on the dress. "Need some help?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. He stepped behind me, and I felt his warm fingers brush against my skin as he carefully pulled the zipper down. The dress loosened, and he gently pushed the velvet off my shoulders, letting it pool around my waist. I was wearing a simple, soft bralette underneath, something I had bought on my own, curious. He didn't mock it or question it. His hands came to rest on my bare shoulders, and he leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss on the back of my neck, just above the delicate lace strap. His touch wasn't filled with hungry lust. It was filled with reverence. It was an act of pure acceptance. "I don't know who this person is," I whispered, looking at our reflection in his bedroom mirror, me, a man with a lace strap visible on his shoulder, and him standing behind me, his expression full of love. The one who likes to wear this. I do, Grant murmured into my hair, his arms wrapping around my waist from behind, holding me securely. He's the person I'm falling in love with. And in that moment, I realized that this journey hadn't been about becoming someone else. It had been about discovering all the hidden facets of myself. The line between Leo and Lila was blurring, not because one was taking over the other, but because they were merging into a more complete, more honest version of who I was meant to be. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was home.